All right. Welcome, guys. Here's a new recording. I was trying out a new game and I decided to change up my avatar, change up a few things. So I'm going to try and do a quick review here just to get my feet wet again. Hopefully you all like this a little bit. Let me know. Feedback's always helpful. If sound's a bit off, tell me, because I'm experimenting a bit more before I get ready for, actually trying to stream and do stuff. So this is BlazBlue Entropy Effect. I played this for about 11 hours, so I have some experience with it. Is it the perfect game? No, but it's pretty fun. It's a roguelike. It's not in early access anymore. It was for a while. So if you go on Steam and you look at the reviews, you might see some reports of like crashes and other things that are not as relevant as they once were, which is helpful to know. I never had a crash. I never had any major issues. The gameplay was very smooth. So I'm happy to say that if you're looking for a playable game, this is very much on the playable side. Now, what you're looking at right now is me just running around the basic area. I cycled through some of the abilities that were around, ways you power yourself up, because, like any roguelike or roguelite, you have to get, some powers that carry over into the future. Now, I know this game has the BlazBlue title. I've not really gotten very far into the BlazBlue, franchise, but I know that this really doesn't have anything to do with the characters from that, aside from using them as playable avatars. The basic idea of the story here is that you're this little robot guy that is, I think, connected to a human consciousness. I think that's the idea, so I'm stumbling a little bit because it is a little bit vague. And it looks like some horrible plague affected the world, and somehow taking control of avatars and fighting enemies will help combat that for some reason. It like shows that your mind is strong enough to handle something else. So right now I'm just going to show off a few of the character trailers they actually give you, because each of these are pretty interesting and it shows how varied your gameplay is going to be. I think I've played 4 to 5 or maybe 4 to 6 characters pretty thoroughly. Like, I've done a few runs with each of them, and I have seen differences in each of my runs. They're all pretty fun. They all like fit a different sort of play style, so you don't end up overly reliant on like proc abilities, which is something important to me in these kinds of games. I don't know about you, but I don't like it when I'm just a glorified vehicle for like flame shots to be activated and bouncing all over the screen and I can't even tell what's going on anymore. I like it more when I feel in control but still get some power-ups from it. So the roster, pretty good. The storyline, pretty terrible. It's not related to BlazBlue. It's not particularly engaging. It's there. It will get you to, get some upgrades. It will get you to talk to some NPCs, but it's not something you're going to be blown away by, which is a little unfortunate if you're looking for that. But honestly, if you're playing roguelites, I don't think you're playing them to, to do much aside from the gameplay. Like, you're not here for the deep story. Some do that well, but this is very, very manageable for what it is. They do promise there will be some new characters, new enemies, and new maps, which is very important because this game does have a very limited set. You will do one run through and you could probably beat the game like, all the way to the final boss on your first playthrough if you do really well. I found it pretty hard to fail, but you will see everything there is to see pretty quickly, and that can be a little sad. It still was fun enough for me to enjoy it for 11 hours, and I want to play more, but it is kind of hard to motivate yourself when you're like, oh, it's the same final boss, it's the same few enemies, is it really worth your time at that point? A full playthrough with each character seems to take around 30 minutes. In this video that I recorded, I did 2 characters, fully played through from the beginning all the way to their end, and it took me like an hour to record this, so maybe a little less than 30 minutes because I'm showing off a bunch of their characters early on here. I'm doing that so you guys can see what they look like, because they do a pretty good job of highlighting a few of their styles, and that way you can decide, hey, does this look cool enough for me to get involved, and then you can see my gameplay of it a bit later. Now, you do get a different experience each time you go through the game because the way you build your character is you get some proc skills, which I'm sure you're all used to if you do roguelites, but you also sort of modify your core abilities. So you might unlock combos that your character doesn't have at the very beginning. You might add effects to those combos, like, oh, now your jump attack does super armor break, or now there's invincibility added to this attack or to your auto attacks, or now it's a bigger attack or it has wide shots. Powers outside of your basic skill sets are still pretty good. They're your usual fare of like, oh, here's some fire effects that shoot all over the screen. Here's like a summon thing that'll spin around you. Here's like a monster you can summon, like a tentacle thing that stays in one spot and does damage. Here's some icicles. Here's a shadow that comes when you dodge. Very generic stuff. I find that when you play the game, you are going to want to focus more on powering up one or two things. So like, let's say you pick up a fire aura around you. You're going to want to focus on just getting as many fire powers as you can, which thankfully the game makes pretty easy as you get selections. Like right now here, I'm starting my playthrough as this character. I show off a few of the abilities she has to begin with. You get choices each time, and then depending on those choices, you get a power up related to that. You might get resources that you can exchange later in order to get things that you really want, or you might get options like, oh, do I want a fire power, do I want a dark power, do I want an ice power? In general, stacking all of one element just seems to be better, because then anything you pick up is going to actually be added to your skill set. It does feel bad when you get like a higher level ability that would replace something else you've been building, so I find the best way to do this is just to kind of stick to what you know works. The really fun thing, and what's on the screen right now, is being able to modify your core skills, being able to add things like penetration to your shots or add an AoE shot. That does change the way you play. There is one weakness to this though. One, you might never really get the abilities you really want on that run, and you might really like some of the abilities, which can be kind of unfortunate. The other weakness is that you're kind of encouraged to just power up one of the skills that you get, so you kind of want to stack everything on it. Like, you might be able to make one ability break super armor, do more damage, hit more times, and then you kind of get pigeonholed into just using that ability, which, you know, while it can be cool to just do big number, do big damage, and feel powerful, it can be a little limited in terms of, you know, how things really play out. Another cool thing is when you beat a whole, you know, run, you will get to save a few skills for your next character to carry over. And then if you inherit that on your new run, you also get some basic abilities that, you know, each character applies. Like, for example, when you dodge, like if you perfect dodge, you might leave a rune behind, or you might get a slight power up for combos that exceed a certain number, depending on the character you inherited. Is it a massive system? No, but it's nice, and it helps streamline certain builds or give you abilities that you might like at the beginning, which is cool. I like that idea. Now, there are some weird decisions in this aside from the storyline. I mean, there's also this system where you can challenge specific boss fights that are a little harder, and you go in without having all the health buffs you tend to have on your normal runs, and you use one of the characters you cleared the game with, which is fine. The weird part about it though is that because you unlock abilities and you lose abilities, and you might, you know, have different builds for whatever just came up on your random slots, you might be like loading up a character and have to fight a boss, and you're like, well, what are my abilities even? Like, which ones was I powered up with? And it's not like you're gonna like necessarily memorize like each setup you did. So you might have to stare at a menu page for a little bit and practice a little bit to remember, oh yeah, like on this run I powered this up, or on this run I didn't pick up this power that I usually use. I just felt that was kind of awkward. I don't really like the implementation of that, because, you know, it's just frustrating if you're used to playing a certain way, or you realize like certain things are powerful, to have to try and like keep that in your mind or go through it. It just interrupts the flow of battle. Thankfully, that's not really the core way of playing the game, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't really give you anything that massive for completing those challenges, which begs the question, why are they there? But, you know, I can't really answer that for you. But I just found that kind of weird. That's the one little weird thing. Now, the game feel, I don't think it feels amazing, but I do feel like it's really fun to play as the character, which is a nice starting point. It's cool, you have a lot of abilities, you feel like everyone's pretty varied up, they don't all play the same. All the characters I played felt notably different in what I was doing, and multiple runs with each one would tend to give me different perspectives. Like I might find out, oh, this gun girl, she's really good at aerial attacks this one run because I got a lot of things that power that up. In another run, I might be doing something a little bit different with her. I might be playing more with some of the invincibility frames she gets. In general, they do tend to have certain things they do better. Like this gun girl, no matter how I built her, I did find her aerial skills were pretty powerful. But you do feel a little bit of difference there, so you're not just going to get the same character each run, even if you're playing the same base character, which is nice. But you will eventually get, you know, things that you like better or things you realize are much stronger, and, you know, that does limit the replay value. The other limit to the replay value is that you're fighting the same bosses over and over and over again. I do think there's a little bit of variation, like you might get 2 or 3 bosses that swap in and out, but it's not different enough to really be notable. You're not going to be blown away and be looking at these crazy fights. I also found that most of the fights, like you can kind of just spam through them, and while that can be good in some ways for some people, I do think it kind of gives you some bad habits. There are some harder fights and some setups where you have like less health to start with, like those aforementioned challenge mode things, where, you know, you will realize like, oh, I should be dodging this, I shouldn't just be face tanking everything. But the game doesn't really encourage you to do that beforehand. Now, there are ways to make the difficulty a little higher for your runs. So you might, you know, do the typical, like, oh, traps do 100% more damage, 200% more damage, 300% more damage, and that gives you points. And the more points you have, the better rewards you have for that run. That's helpful, but it doesn't really feel that necessary because I never really had a progression moment where I was like, wow, I really need to get a ton of points or rack up things to power myself up, because I kind of blew through the game and, you know, never really had that issue, which, you know, 11 hours of content for 20 bucks, I think it is, isn't too bad. I do think that the game is fun. I don't think it's something that is like a mandatory pickup or like you're missing out on a lot of content if you don't play it. But if you really like roguelites, if you really like the kind of combat you're seeing, this is a pretty fun one. I don't feel bad spending 20 bucks on it, especially if they add some more content, if they add some more variety to the enemies. There's going to be a pretty good time to be had here. I don't think it's something that you're going to get like a lot of mileage out of. Like, let's say if you're a streamer and you want to show off something like really cool, you might get away with like a few streams of this, but I don't think somebody would watch this for very long because the difficulty just isn't really there to make it really exciting to watch, and the variety just isn't there for it. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so you guys can see you know, some of the other areas that come up. After you do a few boss fights, like this one's one boss fight, I'll start from the beginning of it. After you do a few boss fights, you'll get into this one part of the map where you kind of get like a, you know, an area where you warp to different boss fights again and power up a little bit more before fighting the final one. I think it's kind of cool, but if they change it up a little bit more or added some more levels, I think it'd make a big difference. You can see this boss fight going on right here. There's just not enough, and even if I face tank a hit, it's not doing enough damage to really be scary. And the way you're kind of built, you kind of want to spam and use big attacks. Like, it doesn't really reward you for sitting around and dodging things. So that's kind of like a negative in my opinion, because then, you know, it just gets very spammy, and then it gets weird when they want you to do more. Let's go to the final boss. This is that little open area thing where there's like an actual map for a bit. It's really not complicated though, so I wouldn't say that this like adds depth. So this is the final boss that comes up, and you'll see how it kind of works. Now, one thing I have to say about this final boss, if you have an aerial character, it's so much easier than if you have a character that has to be on the ground, because again, you can just spam and the boss doesn't really have much he can do to you while you're in the air. I happen to pick up abilities in this run that let me just shoot from the air and do tons of damage. Now, I try to vary it up. I don't like just locking myself to one ability, but it was hard not to because one of my strongest things was to do an aerial shot and then just shoot straight down. But I was messing around and just kind of testing to see how this would feel if I tried to use everything versus just spamming one thing. And yeah, unfortunately spam tends to win out, and abusing, you know, the fact that this guy can't really hit up in the air is very easy. I think it's unfortunate because it just makes it so that ranged characters, as is often the case in many games, just have too much of an advantage. Let me scroll ahead and let me show another character I play. This is a slightly slower one, or at least it seems like they would be, but really they're still pretty quick. I like the gameplay on this one. They have like a rune thing going on. It is still pretty fun to play as. They have heavier hitting hits that you can charge up, so there is some variety in how you play. They are fun. They are pretty cool. Let me zoom ahead so you can see just a little bit of the boss fight here and how quickly that can kind of go. And then let me go to the final boss just so you guys can see like a different variation of that. So let's zoom over here. Here's the same boss we just looked at before with the gun character, and I'll let that play out. This one, you know, eventually you do get like a lot of crazy things going on the screen, but I find that it's a very readable roguelite. I think it's pretty fun, but I think you'd have a better time playing something like Hades if you're really looking for that. But if you've already beaten that game, this could be a nice diversion. Again, 11 hours, and I felt like I saw everything I wanted to see. But there will be new content, and hopefully, if what the devs say is true. So it could be a pretty good time. You see on this one, I'm doing a lot more damage. I'm going through the phases a little bit quicker. Even though I'm stuck on the ground, I'm able to make it kind of work. But I am getting hit by a lot of little things like other characters just didn't have to worry about because they're more, you know, air-oriented. Yeah, so overall, I'd give this game a recommend. Give it a try, see if you like it. That's about all I got here, so we'll end it there.